They stood in front of the chair like guards. It was an empty wingback, upholstered in worn damask, but the way my sons positioned themselves, you'd think it was a throne. "You're not mentioned in the will," Julian said flatly, folding his arms across the chest of his tailored suit. His voice was the same one he used to close real estate deals, impersonal, final. Liam, my younger son, added, "It's just for immediate family." He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was studying a loose thread on the oriental rug, as if it held the secrets to the universe. I looked at them, two grown men who had once been small enough to fall asleep on my chest, and for a second I couldn't draw a breath. Immediate family. I was the woman who gave them life. The air in the conference room at Winslow Albright was chilled, a manufactured cold that had nothing to do with the October weather outside and everything to do with the people inside. I stood at the entrance, clutching a heavy navy blue folder to my chest like a shield. Inside that folder was every document I needed. Not just copies, but originals, their crisp edges, a testament to years spent in a fireproof box. But in that moment, what I held was irrelevant. No one cared, not the attorney, a Mr. Albright I didn't recognize, nor the paralegal whose nameplate read K. Mendez. The few distant relatives scattered around the polished oak table barely glanced up, their faces masks of feigned solemnity. "I received a letter," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "From this office. It had this address, this date." Julian scoffed, a short, sharp sound of derision. "They must have made a mistake. We're handling the estate now. Aunt B appointed us as executors last fall." "She didn't have children," I stated, the words tasting like rust. "I'm her sister." Liam offered a half smile, the kind he used when trying to explain some new app on my phone I'd never asked about. It was a smile meant to placate, to manage me. "Mom, look. You're not in this version. We can explain it all later. For now, just please don't make a scene." My gaze fell to the floor. Worn velvet carpet, beige with flecks of green. A dark stain bloomed near the sideboard. Coffee, maybe. Or wine. I let the silence hang in the air, a heavy, suffocating blanket, and then I took a step forward. "I'm not here to make a scene," I said, choosing each word with surgical precision. "I'm here because Beatrice wanted me to be." "You're not on the list," the secretary, Ms. Mendez, repeated from behind her desk. She looked young, uncomfortable, trapped in a drama she hadn't signed up for. I didn't blame her. "She would have wanted me here," I said again, not to them this time, but to the room itself, to the ghost of my sister I felt hovering in the corner. I took another step, reached into my folder, and pulled out a single folded document. I handed it to Mr. Mendez. "Please give this to Mr. Albright," I said. "I believe it supersedes any amendments made last fall." Mr. Mendez blinked, her eyes wide, but she took the paper and walked toward a heavy oak door at the far end of the room. Julian started to protest, but Liam, for the first time, acted. He put a hand on his brother's arm. "Let's just wait," Liam muttered, his voice barely a whisper. I walked to the chair they'd been blocking and sat down. Neither of them moved to stop me. The folder still rested on my lap, but I no longer held it like a shield. I held it like proof. I hadn't planned to speak first. I had imagined this moment as a solemn affair, the quiet rustle of paper, the formal, respectful tone of a lawyer reading a final testament. Not this petty, humiliating gatekeeping by my own flesh and blood. Across the table, a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years gave me a faint, hesitant nod. I returned it. The heavy oak door opened. Mr. Albright stepped out. He was tall and silver-haired, with a hint of dust on his tweed jacket, as if he'd just emerged from a library of forgotten books. He held the document I'd given him, flipping through it with a deliberate slowness that made my heart hammer against my ribs. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice a calm baritone that cut through the tension. May I speak with you privately for a moment? Julian bristled. We were told this was a closed session. Mr. Albright ignored him completely. This concerns joint filings from 2008. If you'll follow me. I rose and followed him down a hushed hallway, my legs steady despite the crushing weight in my chest. His office smelled of cedar and old paper. There were no client chairs, only a high counter where he laid the document flat. This is unexpected, he said, his gaze meeting mine. You and Beatrice executed a mutual will in 2008, witnessed, notarized, and filed with the county recorder. It predates the revision the boys submitted. He paused. She insisted on it. I remember her saying she didn't trust anyone but you to see things through. He looked up from the paper, his eyes clear and direct. Legally, this document overrides any later changes unless it was revoked in your presence, was it? No, I said. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then you are the sole beneficiary. The entire estate. House, land, accounts. Everything. He let out a slow breath. The boys don't know about this. They suspect, I said. But no, they don't know. He studied my face for a long moment, then closed the file. Would you like me to inform them now? No, I said, the word coming out colder than I felt. Let them hear it during the reading, with everyone else. A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face. You'll stay for the reading then? Yes, I said, a faint smile touching my lips, now that I've been allowed to sit. When I returned to the conference room, neither of my sons looked at me, but I saw their postures shift. They knew something had changed. The balance of power had tilted, and for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't the one left standing at the door. The house was quiet when I got home that evening, but it wasn't the comforting quiet of solitude. It was the strained silence of a space holding its breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. I hung my coat in the hall closet, kicked off my sensible shoes, and walked straight to the kitchen. The fluorescent light over the sink flickered, a nervous tic it had developed months ago. I hadn't bothered fixing it. No one else was coming in here but me. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove to boil, even though my stomach was a tight knot that wouldn't welcome anything, not even tea. It was habit, muscle memory from a life that no longer existed. There was a time this kitchen was the vibrant heart of the house, alive with voices. Julian arguing with Liam over the last of the cereal. Beatrice, my sister, laughing from the doorway, a sound like wind chimes. Arthur, my husband, clinking his coffee mug against mine just to make me smile before he left for work. That was another lifetime. Arthur died 22 years ago, just after the new year. A massive heart failure in his sleep. He was gone before the ambulance even turned onto our street. I remember sitting on the porch steps in my robe, the January snow falling into my slippers, the phone dangling from my numb hand. Julian was 23, Liam barely 20. They were devastated for about a week. Then their grief turned practical. Who gets the car? Who takes over the mortgage payments? Who handles the life insurance? They stepped into adulthood like people jumping onto a moving train, fast, loud, and without looking back. At first, I didn't mind their pragmatism. I was proud of their resilience. Julian got into real estate, leveraging his charm into a decent income within 2 years. Liam stayed local, became a mechanic, and opened a garage with a friend. He said he liked working with his hands. I helped them both. I always helped. When Julian's first big investment deal fell through and he needed cash to bridge the gap, I wrote him a check from my savings. When Liam's business partner skipped town with their operating funds, I dipped into my pension. No questions asked, just love. That's what mothers do. And when Bee started getting sick, when her letters stopped being funny and started repeating themselves, when she couldn't remember what she'd eaten for breakfast, I was the one who found her a neurologist. I drove her to every appointment. She despised the idea of assisted living, So I turned our guest room into her own private space, a sanctuary. "She's not our responsibility," Liam had said one afternoon when I asked if he could pick up her prescriptions on his way home. "You're her sister." I didn't answer. What was there to say? He was right. I was her sister. But they were her nephews, the boys she'd spoiled and adored. They saw her as a burden. I saw her as the other half of my own story. Bea had always known the truth about them. People say things with startling clarity when they feel their own minds beginning to fray. She never married, never had children of her own. "I have enough family to manage, thank you very much," she used to say. She was witty, sharp, and wore expensive perfume even when she was just sitting in the garden. One evening, about a year after she moved in, she asked if we could write our wills together. "People change their minds when there's money on the table, Ellie," she'd said, her voice clear as a bell. "Let's not give them the chance." We met with Mr. Albright's predecessor, a kind old man named Mr. Winslow, and had everything done by the book. A mutual, irrevocable will. 2 signatures, 2 witnesses, each of us naming the other as sole beneficiary. I remember thinking it was more ceremony than necessity, a dramatic flourish from my ever-theatrical sister. But I went along with it, for her peace of mind. Years passed. Bea's mind faded further, but she still smiled when I read her poetry. She still called me her baby sister, even when she couldn't recall what day it was. She died on a Thursday morning, peacefully in her sleep. I sat with her for 2 hours before I called anyone, not out of denial, but out of respect. Some goodbyes deserve a soft departure. The funeral was small. Julian gave a eulogy that sounded like it was written by a public relations firm. Liam stood stiffly beside him, hands jammed in his pockets. Neither of them had visited her more than twice in the last year of her life. But after the service, everything changed. They both started calling, asking about the estate. Julian came by with flowers. Liam offered to fix the flickering light in the kitchen. "You shouldn't have to handle all this alone, Mom," they'd said in unison. I let them. I watched. I waited. When the official letter from Winslow Albright arrived, addressed only to me, I didn't tell them. Then, last week, I was in the garden when I overheard Julian on his cell phone through the open kitchen window. "She doesn't need to be there," he was saying. "We've got the final draft. It's all lined up." I went upstairs, opened the safe in my closet, and took out the navy blue folder. Everything they thought was lined up had been signed away and legally sealed years ago. Still, a foolish part of me hoped I was wrong. Hoped they were just being careless, not cruel. Today, in that cold conference room, proved otherwise. Today, they blocked my seat. Beatrice and I were born 11 months apart, almost to the day. Irish twins, people called us back then. I was the quiet one, always reading, always watching. She was the spark, the one with red ribbons in her hair and too many opinions for a girl her age. We shared a bedroom until we were 16. She taught me how to fake a stomachache to get out of gym class and how to lie with a straight face if you were caught sneaking pie from the cooling rack. I taught her how to balance a checkbook, how to write a proper thank you note, and how to keep a secret without cracking under pressure. Our parents died young, a car crash on the interstate a week before my 19th birthday. Bea was 18. Suddenly, we were alone in the house we'd grown up in, 2 girls with no compass but each other. We sold the place, moved into a small rental apartment, and figured things out. I met Arthur at the public library. He was fixing a rattling radiator and said my voice sounded like music when I was reading aloud during story hour. I told him he was trying too hard. He said trying was half the battle. I married him a year later. Bea never married, but she lived a life that was fuller than most. She traveled whenever she had the money, Greece, Canada, even a month in Japan once. She taught English as a second language, managed a small art gallery, and for a few years worked at a local radio station. Her stories never ended where you thought they would. Every time she came home for a visit, she brought something odd. A stone shaped like a heart from a beach in Maine, an apron embroidered with smiling frogs, a jar of pickled onions from a street market in Dublin. The boys adored her when they were young. "Aunt Bee," they'd yell, thundering to the door to meet her. She'd twirl them around until they were dizzy, let them stay up past their bedtime, and feed them candy before dinner. Arthur would wink at me over their heads and say, "She's not here to raise them. She's here to remind them life can be loud." That changed as they grew older. Once Julian went off to college, he always seemed to have a scheduling conflict when she visited. Liam followed his brother's lead, though with less overt dismissal. They grew tired of her eccentricities. They said she was too much. I watched it happen, like watching a faucet drip, slowly at first, then constantly, until one day you realize the whole sink is wet. When she moved in with me after her diagnosis, mild cognitive decline, the doctors called it, then early-stage Alzheimer's, neither of them offered to help. Not once, not even a phone call to see how she was settling in. Too busy, they'd say. Bee knew. Even in her forgetfulness, she knew. One day, as I was brushing her long silver hair, she said softly, "They'll come around when I'm gone, Ellie. Watch them. Like pigeons at a park bench. They only start pecking when there's something to take." It wasn't said with bitterness, just a clear-eyed recognition of fact. She said it the way one might comment that it looks like rain. Her decline was steady but slow. First, she forgot how to use the microwave. Then she started misplacing her reading glasses, only to find them in the refrigerator. Then she began introducing me to visitors as her kind neighbor instead of her sister. I never corrected her. What would have been the point? But there were moments of startling lucidity, moments when she'd look at me and her eyes would spark with the old fire. "Ellie," she said one afternoon, "if I ever forget who I am, you just remind me who you are." I promised I would, and I did. I took care of her until the very end. It wasn't always easy. There were nights she'd wander outside in her nightgown, and I'd have to chase her barefoot down the sidewalk. There were mornings I'd find cereal in the freezer and the milk carton in the broom closet. But I never lost my patience, because love isn't just about the joyful moments. It's about holding the line when someone you love is drifting away. Near the end, she stopped speaking, communicating only in small hums and occasional nods. But when I sat on the edge of her bed and held her hand, she always turned her face toward me. The day before she passed, she squeezed my hand twice, once for hello, once for goodbye. I didn't cry when she died, not immediately. Grief has its own timetable. But today, in that lawyer's office, when Julian stood in front of me like a bouncer and said, "You're not mentioned here," I wanted to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because if Bee had been in that room, whole, sharp, and standing beside me, she would have looked at my sons and said, "You boys are about to learn what it means to underestimate a woman who's already lost everything but her pride." That's why I brought the folder. Not to stir up drama, not to win some petty victory, but because I had promised my sister I would remind them who I am, and I fully intended to keep that promise. The morning after the will reading, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea gone cold. The silence from my sons was a palpable thing, a strategic void. They needed time to regroup, to find an angle, to spin what had happened in that office into a narrative where they were the victims. Julian hadn't called. Liam hadn't texted. I wasn't surprised. This wasn't the first time my trust had been treated as a tool for their convenience. When Arthur died, I'd made the mistake of letting Julian, the older, more responsible son, handle the estate paperwork. Within 2 weeks, he'd convinced me to sign over the deed to our family home into his name. "Just until probate clears, Mom," he'd said. "It's simpler for tax purposes." I signed, not understanding the legal labyrinth I was stepping into. 2 years later, I had to plead with him not to refinance it. He told me I was being dramatic. That was the first time I felt the shift, the subtle tilt from being their mother to being their obstacle. Liam was more subtle. He didn't ask for control. He asked for sympathy. A short-term loan for a new transmission for his truck. A shoulder to cry on when his third girlfriend left him. He'd never yell. He'd just forget to say thank you. Over the years, I slowly stopped offering, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. I picked up the phone and dialed Mr. Albright's number. He answered on the third ring. "Eleanor, I was just about to call you." "Is that so?" I asked, letting a sliver of ice edge my voice. "Yes, I've reviewed the documentation again. It's ironclad. Your claim takes precedence. You are the sole legal heir. The other will, frankly, should never have been processed without consulting the earlier mutual agreement. The estate is being transferred to your name. The house, the land, the investment accounts, everything listed in the 2008 will. You should expect formal confirmation by the end of next week." "So it's done," I said. "It's done," he confirmed. I thanked him and hung up, my gaze drifting out the window to the dogwood tree B had planted in 1995. It was blooming again, its pale pink blossoms stretching like open arms into the spring air. B said it reminded her of something delicate but defiant. That day, I finally understood why she chose it. The house felt too quiet, but it was the silence of anticipation, the pause before a doorbell rings. I knew they would come. They would come with apologies dressed as concern, with justifications wrapped in love. And I would be ready. That's when I made my decision. This wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. This was about making sure they never again mistook my silence for weakness. I reached for a notepad and a pen. A plan was beginning to form, one that required patience, precision, and me, fully awake, fully present, and fully unwilling to be ignored ever again. I didn't tell anyone I was going back to see a lawyer. Let them think I was still the quiet woman who gave, forgave, and stepped back without asking for a seat at the table. I walked into Mr. Albright's office with my folder and my list. "I want to formalize the transfer," I said, sitting before he invited me to. "All of it, and I want protections in place." He blinked. "Protections?" "Yes, legal locks. I don't want either of my sons accessing a cent of this estate, not through proxy, not through power of attorney, and especially not through charm." Mr. Albright cleared his throat. "We can draft a restriction clause. It's well within your rights." "I also want to open a living trust," I said, "for someone who actually still treats me like a human being." "Do you have a beneficiary in mind?" "I do. Her name is Sophie Hayes, my cousin's granddaughter. She's 26, works nights at the city library, and visits me every 2 weeks like clockwork. She has never asked me for a dime." He looked up, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "And you want to make her the successor to Beatrice's estate?" "Not all of it," I clarified, "but a portion, enough to set her free from struggle, enough to let her breathe." He smiled gently. "That's very generous." "No," I said, "it's appropriate." We worked for nearly an hour. When everything was in motion, I added one more thing. I want a no-contest clause in my own will. If either of my sons contests any part of these arrangements after my passing, they are to be disinherited completely. Mr. Albright didn't flinch. He just jotted it down. Some might call that harsh, but those people have never looked into their own child's eyes and seen calculation instead of love. I left his office with a strange sense of calm. It wasn't joy, but something more solid. It was the quiet after a storm, when the air is still charged, but the sky is finally clear. At home, the answering machine was blinking. 2 messages. The first was from Liam. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Hope you're okay. Julian and I were talking. Maybe we should all sit down soon, clear the air. The second was from Julian. Mother, I think there's been some confusion regarding the will. It's possible there was a clerical issue. We're working on clarifying things, but we would appreciate it if you could forward any documents you brought to the meeting for transparency. Transparency, the word people use when they want to see through you, not with you. I deleted both messages. Then I sat down and wrote 2 short identical letters. I received your messages. I am not interested in discussing the estate at this time. All matters are being handled through my attorney. Please direct any further questions to him. Mother. I sealed the envelopes. I wasn't angry. I was awake. And when a woman wakes up after years of softening her edges to fit into the corners others have carved for her, she doesn't go back to sleep. Not ever again. The next morning, the doorbell rang. It was Julian. He gave me the smile that didn't quite touch his eyes. Hi, Mom. I was in the area. At 9 a.m. on a Saturday? I raised an eyebrow, but stepped aside. I didn't offer him coffee. I wanted to talk, he began, sitting on the edge of an armchair. There seems to have been some miscommunication. Liam and I were blindsided. Were you? I asked softly. He paused. Well, yes. No one told us there was a prior will. Because you didn't ask, I said. You assumed. You assumed she left it all to you, and that I would sit quietly and nod along like I always did. I wouldn't put it that way. No, you wouldn't, I said. But I would. And I just did. He leaned forward, his voice taking on that persuasive edge. Mom, we're family. We can fix this. You're very good at what you do, Julian. Selling people things. You sold me on the idea that I needed to sign over this house for tax purposes. I'm not buying anything today. He shut his mouth, the color draining from his face. I'm not angry, I said. I'm done. I've made arrangements. Everything is being handled legally, and if you try to challenge it, you will be disinherited from anything I still control. He looked up, stunned. You're really going to cut us out? No, I said. I'm going to stop rewarding neglect. For the first time in years, my son had absolutely nothing to say. Liam showed up 2 days later, not in a suit, but in his usual jeans and oil-stained jacket. He stood on the porch, shifting his weight like a boy waiting to be called inside. I made tea. We sat in silence. I didn't know about the old will, Ma, he said finally. Julian handled everything. I just trusted him. You always did, I said, stirring my tea. He reached into his jacket and slid an envelope across the table. I don't want money. That's not why I'm here. This is everything you ever loaned me. I made a list. I know I can't pay it back all at once, but I want to. That stopped me, not the gesture, but the math. Every number was right, down to the $50 I'd slipped him for a tow truck 6 years ago. You kept track, I said. He nodded. Always meant to make it right. I just didn't know how to say it. He looked up, his eyes filled with a weariness that felt genuine. I was angry at the reading, at you, at B, at everything, but I wasn't surprised. Not really. Why not? Because you're not stupid, Ma. You were never stupid. I think maybe we just counted on you acting like you were. It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in a decade. I want to earn back your trust, he said quietly. Then don't fight the will, I replied. Don't let Julian talk you into anything. Just leave it be. He nodded slowly. I can do that. I didn't smile or soften. I just looked at him and said, good. And for the first time, that felt like enough. The letter from Julian's attorney arrived a week later. It was polite, full of legal jargon like unfortunate discrepancy and amicable resolution, but the threat was clear. Our client hopes to avoid formal litigation, but reserves the right to pursue all legal remedies. I called Mr. Albright. I was expecting this, he said calmly. It's posturing, Eleanor. They might even file something to rattle you, but the will is unshakable. That night, I lay awake thinking of Julian at 7 years old, standing at the edge of the deep end of the pool, terrified to jump. I had stood in the water with my arms open, promising I would catch him, and I did, every single time. There is no word for the ache of knowing someone you once caught without fail would now rather watch you drown. The next morning I wrote him a letter. Julian, I received your attorney's letter. You have made your position clear. Here is mine. I will not rescind the will. I will not entertain compromise. You have already taken enough from me. I am simply choosing for the first time not to give you more. Mother. When I got home from the post office, the light on the answering machine was blinking. It was Sophie. Hi, Aunt Eleanor. I hope this week hasn't been too heavy. I baked lemon squares, the kind you like. I'll bring them by tomorrow. Okay. I miss you. I smiled. For the first time in days, I truly smiled. The world had narrowed, yes, but it hadn't closed in. It had distilled, reduced to only the people who mattered. And in that smallness, there was finally room to breathe. Sophie arrived with the lemon squares and her soft, hesitant knock. We sat at the table with the good teapot, the one with the tiny crack under the handle she always pretended not to notice. Have they called again? She asked gently, without needing to say their names. Julian sent a lawyer. Liam came by. I told her what needed saying. She nodded, picking at the parchment paper in the tin. I'm proud of you. The words caught me off guard. I couldn't remember the last time someone had said that to me. I looked at her, at the kindness in her every movement. You remind me of Bea sometimes, I said. Her eyes softened. She was good to me. Even when she forgot my name, she still held my hand like she knew me. She did know you, I said. Her heart never forgot. I told her then about the trust. She went still, her eyes filling with tears. You don't have to do that. I know, but I want to. Why me? She whispered. Because you come, I said. Because you stay. Because you never ask for anything, and you always bring something anyway. Your time, your presence, your lemon squares. I don't deserve that kind of trust, she said. No one does, I replied gently. That's the point of it. It's not earned, it's given. Before she left, she turned at the door. If they ever try to make you feel small again, she said, her voice fierce, you just call me. I'll remind you who you are. I didn't cry until after the door had closed, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing that someone had promised to stand by me, and I believed them. The official notification of Julian's lawsuit arrived in a thick envelope from the courthouse. Allegations of undue influence, of Beatrice's mental incompetence, a son suing his mother. I set the letter down, picked up the phone, and dialed Mr. Albright. Received it, I said. So did I, he replied. I've already filed our response. We're still on solid ground, Eleanor. I walked to the closet and pulled down Bea's journals from her final years. Her handwriting was strong, her sentences clear. There was no confusion, no fog. Ellie is the only one who sees me, she had written. The boys see a bank account with a fading pulse. I will not let them undo what we have built. I made copies and mailed them to Mr. Albright with a simple note. If they want proof of her mind, give them her words. The courtroom was smaller than I remembered. Mr. Albright sat beside me, calm and prepared. Julian sat at the other table alone. His lawyer, apparently, had called in sick. The judge, A sharp-eyed woman with no time for theatrics read through the file. You've submitted a claim contesting the validity of a 2008 will on the grounds of your aunt's incompetence, she said to Julian. Yes, Your Honor. Do you have any documentation to support this claim? No, Your Honor, but then this is hearsay and speculation. We don't run courtrooms on either. She looked at the file Mr. Albright had submitted, the will, the witness statements, B's journal entries. She didn't need to read it all. There is no merit to this contest. The will stands as written. Motion dismissed. She struck the gavel once. It was over. Julian walked out without a backward glance. I watched him go, not with hatred, but with a vast, empty distance. Outside, I declined Mr. Albright's offer of a ride. I needed to walk. I walked past the landmarks of a life I had lived, of a family I had raised. They didn't feel heavy anymore. They just felt true. When Sophie came by that Friday, I had an envelope waiting for her. She didn't open it, just held it like it mattered. I think I'm done now, I said softly. With what? With waiting for something that was never coming. She looked at me, that perceptive gaze that saw more than it should. You're not angry anymore. No, I said. I'm something better. I spend a lot of time these days thinking about what we leave behind. Not just property and possessions, but truth and memory and choice. There was a time I believed my silence was a kindness, that being agreeable was the same as being good. I don't believe that anymore. I believe in decency, but not at the cost of myself. I believe in family, but not the kind that only remembers you when there's something to inherit. And I believe in love, but I no longer mistake it for endless, thankless obligation. Maybe you've sat across from people who used to be your safe harbor and realized they no longer see you as whole. Maybe you've been the giver for too long, the one who stepped back so others could step forward. If you have, I hope you know this. You can stop. You can say no. You can say enough. You can protect the parts of yourself you used to hand out so freely. You don't have to apologize for doing it late, only for never doing it at all. Your voice matters. It's time to use it.